His hand gently touched her belly, as if caressing glass about to shatter, and Ellen felt the entire world stop in that gesture. The silence around them wasn't empty. It was dense, laden with unspoken promises and imminent dangers. His eyes, fixed on her, revealed something more frightening than any storm: fear. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're tuning in from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The cold sliced her skin like ground glass. Ellen could feel each gust of wind burning her lungs as she fought to stay conscious, but her body no longer responded as it should. She lay in the snow, the weight of the baby inside her seeming to be the only point of warmth that still resisted. Everything around her sounded distant, as if the world had decided to go on without her. The voices shouting orders, the heavy boots sinking into the snow, the metallic scent of blood mixed with the icy air. It all felt like a bad dream from which she couldn't wake. When the healer finally managed to pull her from that stupor, 3 days had passed. 3 days during which the entire castle seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if the Omega carrying the king's heir would survive or not. Ellen slowly opened her eyes, still confused, still bruised, and the first thing she saw was the high ceiling of the chamber where they had placed her. It wasn't the simple room she had occupied before. It was something larger, more protected, surrounded by guards she could hear even through the thick walls. The door opened without warning. Ryder entered as he always did, with a presence that filled any space with a gaze that didn't ask, only stated. He stopped beside the bed, observing her with an intensity Ellen still couldn't fully interpret. There was anger there, yes, but also something deeper, something that seemed to scratch the surface of the mask of control he wore so well. "You're all right," he said, and it wasn't a question. Ellen tried to move, but her body immediately protested. She let out a low sound of pain and saw his jaw clench. He didn't like seeing her like this. He didn't like being reminded that she was fragile, that someone had managed to touch her, that he hadn't been there when he should have. "The baby's fine," she murmured, instinctively placing a hand on her belly. The healer said it's fine. Ryder nodded, but didn't relax. He pulled a chair over and sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped. He was closer than he usually stood, and Ellen noticed he looked tired in a way that went beyond the physical. It was as if something within him had been forced to awaken, something he preferred to keep dormant. "Someone planned this," he said, his voice low but firm. "It wasn't an accident. It wasn't the work of bandits." She had already suspected as much. The memories came in confused flashes, the abrupt pull, the muffled voice, the familiar scent she couldn't quite place, but hearing the king confirm it made everything too real, too heavy. "Who?" she asked, even knowing that if he had the answer, he would have already acted. "I don't know yet, but I will find out." There was a promise in those words, a promise that carried the weight of a threat for whoever had dared to touch her. Ellen didn't know if it made her feel more protected or more exposed, because if someone within the castle had tried to kill her, it meant her presence there bothered people with enough power to act without immediate fear of the consequences. The following days were strange. Ellen remained confined to her room, under constant surveillance, while the castle around her buzzed with rumours she could only catch in fragments. The maids who came to change her bed linen spoke too softly when she was awake, but Ellen noticed the tense glances, the pauses that lasted too long, the way some avoided looking directly at her. One morning, as she tried to walk a bit to regain her strength, she overheard voices from the other side of the door. 2 maids were talking, seemingly unaware she was close enough to listen. "They say he ordered everyone on duty that night interrogated." Interrogated? Sounds more like torture. I saw one of the guards come back with a swollen face. "He won't stop until he finds out who it was." What if he finds out it was someone important? There was a pause. Ellen held her breath. "Then there will be blood, lots of blood." Voices moved away, but the words echoed in Ellen's head. She returned to bed, her heart pounding, and realized the fear she felt wasn't just for herself. It was also for Ryder, for what he was willing to do, for how far he would go to protect her. And why that frightened her as much as it comforted her. When the healer returned to examine her, Ellen took the opportunity to ask questions. The woman was older, a person of few words, but her eyes said much more than her mouth. "The king is different," Ellen commented, trying to sound casual. The healer didn't answer immediately. She continued checking the injuries, applying ointments with precise movements. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful. "He's afraid, and a king who's afraid is dangerous. To his enemies, but also to himself." Ellen didn't know what to say. The idea that Ryder could be afraid seemed incompatible with the image she had of him. But then she remembered the way he had looked at her when she woke, the almost imperceptible clench in his jaw, the constant tension in his shoulders. He never had anything to lose before, the healer continued, almost as if talking to herself. It was always just him, the kingdom, the power. Now he has you, he has the baby, and that changes everything. That hit Ellen in a way she hadn't expected. She had always known she was seen as a piece in the political game, as the omega carrying the heir, as the outsider who shouldn't be there. But she had never thought of herself as something Ryder could truly fear losing. Not in this way. Not really. That night, he returned, later than usual with an even darker gaze. He sat in the same chair, but this time said nothing. He just sat there, watching her in silence, as if trying to memorize every detail. "Did you find anything?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Fragments, contradictions, lies too bad to be true." He ran a hand over his face, a rare gesture of weariness. "There's someone inside the castle, someone who knows the paths, the guards, the schedules, someone who knew exactly where you would be." Ellen felt a chill. The idea that someone had planned every step, waited for the right moment, calculated how to injure her without being seen. It all felt like something out of a nightmare. But the reality was even worse because it meant she wasn't safe even there, surrounded by high walls and armed guards. "The winter ball is approaching," Ryder said, changing the subject abruptly. "The council wants it to go on. They think cancelling it would be admitting weakness. And what do you think?" He stared at her, and Ellen saw something dangerous gleam in his eyes. "I think whoever tried to kill you will be there, and I'll be waiting." Preparations for the ball began 2 days later. Ellen watched from the window as servants carried heavy fabrics, enormous candles, arrangements of white flowers that seemed to glow against the snow piled in the gardens. All of it had an air of forced normalcy, as if the entire castle were trying to pretend nothing had happened, that no recent blood stained the memory of those walls. The chamber door opened, and Lady Maya entered without asking permission. She was one of the few nobles who treated Ellen with something close to civility, though it always came with a certain condescension that irritated more than it offended. She carried a folded dress in her arms, a dark green, fabric that seemed to absorb the light. "The king had this made for you," she said, spreading the dress over the bed. "For the ball." Ellen looked at the fabric without moving. The idea of going to the ball, of being exposed before the entire court, of smiling and acting as if everything were fine, seemed too absurd to be real. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice low. Lady Maya sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed with a familiarity that wasn't welcome, but which Ellen didn't have the energy to reject. "You don't have a choice. If you don't appear, they'll say you're too weak, too scared, too unworthy, and whoever did this to you will think they won." Ellen hated to admit it, but the woman was right. Her absence would be interpreted as defeat, as proof that she didn't belong in that world. And perhaps that was exactly what the attacker wanted. "He'll be by your side," Lady Maya continued, her tone almost soft. "The king. He won't let anyone near you, I'm sure of it. There was something in the way she said it, a strange intonation that made Ellen look at her more closely. Lady Maya quickly averted her gaze, smoothing the dress with her hands, and Ellen realized she knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to be uncomfortable. You know who it was, Ellen said, not as a question, but as a statement. Lady Maya's face tensed. She stood up too quickly, adjusting her skirts with abrupt movements. I don't know anything. And if I did, I couldn't say. Why? Because some truths cost lives. And with that, she left, leaving Ellen alone with the dark green dress and the growing certainty that she was surrounded by people. Who knew more than they said, who saw more than they admitted, who chose silence as a form of survival. That afternoon, Ryder appeared earlier than usual. He carried a different tension, an urgency Ellen recognized immediately. He closed the door carefully, locking it, and only then turned to face her. I found the sentinel who disappeared, he said, his voice strained. She was hiding, scared. Scared of whom? He hesitated, and that was revealing. Ryder never hesitated. Of a name she won't say. But I managed to pry some things out. She saw someone near the attack site, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone from the court. Ellen felt her stomach churn. The confirmation made everything more real, more suffocating. It wasn't an external enemy. It was someone who walked the same corridors as her, who ate at the same table, who smiled and bowed and pretended loyalty. Who? She asked, though she knew he wouldn't say. Not yet. I'll find out at the ball. Whoever it is will be there, and they'll make a mistake. There was a dangerous confidence in those words. Ryder seemed convinced he could control the situation, that he just needed to observe, carefully enough for the truth to reveal itself. But Ellen knew the court well enough to know that people there were masters at hiding what they felt, at smiling while sharpening knives behind backs. What if they don't? She asked. What if they're too clever? Then I'll force them to. The way he said it, cold and calculating, made Ellen realize Ryder was planning something. Something that probably involved using her as bait, as the central piece of a trap she didn't even know was being set. You're going to use me, she said, not as an accusation, but as understanding. He didn't deny it. He just approached, stopping before her with that presence that always made her feel small and protected at the same time. I'm going to protect you, but I need you to trust me. Ellen stared at him, looking for any sign of doubt, of hesitation. She found nothing but absolute determination. She didn't know if that reassured her or scared her even more. The following days were a mix of preparation and escalating tension. Ellen received constant visits from maids bringing items for the ball, adjusting her dress, teaching her protocols she should follow. Each interactions seemed to carry a hidden weight. Each gaze lasted a second longer than it should. Each silence was filled with unvoiced suspicions. On the eve of the ball, the healer returned for a final examination. She checked Ellen's belly carefully, listened to the baby's heartbeat, and only then allowed her to get up. You're recovering well, she said, but there was an implied but in her voice. Physically, at least. And mentally. The healer looked at her with those eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Mentally, I think you're more scared than you admit. And rightly so. Fear is what keeps us alive. Ellen didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Fear was a constant presence now, a weight she carried along with the baby, a shadow that followed her through every room, every corridor, every moment of silence. That night, she dreamed of snow and blood. She dreamed she was back in that place, feeling the biting cold, hearing the muffled voice, trying to scream but unable to make a sound. She woke up sweating, her heart racing, and it took a few seconds to remember where she was, to recognize the safe room, the guards on the other side of the door, the distance between the nightmare and reality. But the line between the two was growing increasingly thin. On the morning of the ball, the entire castle seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. Servants hurried to and fro, voices echoed through the corridors. The smell of food being prepared in the kitchens invaded every corner. Ellen remained in her room as long as she could, postponing the moment of dressing, of transforming herself into the version everyone expected to see. When she finally put on the dark green dress, she felt the weight of the fabric like armor. The maids arranged her hair, pinning it in a style too elaborate for her taste, applied soft colors to her face to hide the pallor that still lingered. When they finished and left her alone before the mirror, Ellen barely recognized herself. The woman staring back seemed stronger than she felt, more confident than she had a right to be. But perhaps that was exactly what she needed to project. Perhaps survival depended on appearing invincible even when she was broken inside. Ryder appeared as the sun began to set. He wore formal attire. That accentuated his already intimidating presence, and when he saw her, he paused for a moment, just watching. There was something in his gaze Ellen couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of pride and possessiveness that made her feel exposed and valued at the same time. "You look beautiful," he said, and it wasn't flattery. It was a statement of fact. Ellen didn't know what to answer. She just nodded, allowing him to approach, to take her hand with excessive care, as if she was something too precious to be held tightly. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low, but firm. "Don't stray. Don't trust anyone." "Not even you?" He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was sharp, dangerous. "Especially not me." And with that, they left the room, walking side by side through the corridors that led to the main ballroom. With each step, Ellen felt the weight of invisible gazes, of unspoken expectations, of judgments that would come no matter what she did. The entire castle seemed to breathe in sync, waiting for the moment the Omega who had almost died would appear before the court, alive, pregnant, and beside the king who swore to protect her. The ballroom was transformed. Candles everywhere cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the scent of white flowers mixed with mulled wine made the air dense, almost suffocating. Ellen entered beside Ryder, and the silence that fell was immediate, heavy, laden with meanings she didn't need to decipher to feel. All eyes turned to her, some with curiosity, others with poorly disguised contempt, and a few with something that resembled fear. Ryder did not slow his pace. He guided her through the hall as if he didn't notice the reactions, as if her presence there were the most natural thing in the world. But Ellen felt each gaze like a needle, each whisper like a blade. She maintained an upright posture, a neutral face, but inside she was crumbling. Lady Isabella was the first to approach. She was one of the most influential figures at court, widow of an important general and known for her sharp tongue. She wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes and a bow that seemed more mockery than respect. "What a surprise to see you here," she said, her voice too sweet to be sincere. "I thought you were still recovering." "I'm fine," Ellen replied, maintaining a firm tone. "Thank you for your concern." Isabella inclined her head, but her eyes swept over Ellen's body in a calculated way, pausing at her rounded belly long enough to make clear what she thought. Then she turned to Ryder with a different smile, more genuine, more intimate. "Your Majesty, the castle is magnificent, as always." Ryder merely nodded, his expression unreadable. He didn't like Lady Isabella. Ellen knew that. But she was too powerful to be ignored, and he needed every possible ally at that moment. The woman sensed the coolness but didn't seem bothered. She simply moved away with the same calculated grace with which she had arrived. "She knows something," Ellen murmured as soon as they were alone. "Everyone here knows something," Ryder responded, his eyes sweeping the room. "The question is who knows enough to be dangerous." They circulated through the space slowly, greeting nobles, accepting bows, engaging in superficial conversations that led nowhere. But Ellen noticed the details. She noticed who averted their gaze too quickly, who smiled with excessive effort, who seemed too uncomfortable in her presence. Every small sign was a clue, a piece of a puzzle. She still couldn't assemble. Lord Arthur approached with 2 glasses of wine, offering one to Ryder and another to Ellen. She refused with a polite gesture and saw something flicker in his eyes. Disappointment? Annoyance? It was hard to say. "A magnificent evening," he commented, his voice deep, "though some say it's no time for celebrations." "And what do you say?" Ryder asked, his tone neutral. Arthur smiled, but it was a strained smile. "I say the kingdom needs stability, and stability comes from traditions being respected." There was a message in those words, a veiled criticism of Ellen's presence, of the baby she carried, of the breach of protocol her existence there represented. Ryder did not respond verbally, but Ellen felt the tension grow between the 2 men, a silent battle of wills and positions. When Arthur moved away, Ryder held Ellen's arm with a little more force. "He's one of the suspects?" she asked quietly. "Everyone is a suspect." The music began, and couples started forming for the dance. Ryder turned to Ellen, extending his hand with a formality that contrasted with the intimacy they shared in private. "Can you do this?" he asked. And there was genuine concern there. Ellen looked at the dance floor, at the eyes that still followed them, at the stage where everyone expected to see her fail, stumble, prove she didn't belong in that world. And something inside her hardened. "I can," she said, placing her hand in his. The dance was torture disguised as elegance. Each movement demanded more from Ellen's body than she had to give, but she didn't show it. She remained firm, following the steps with mechanical precision, ignoring the pain that began to throb in her back, the fatigue that threatened to break her posture. Ryder guided, her carefully, but there was something different in the way he held her. Too possessive, too protective, as if he were marking his territory before everyone. When the music ended, Ellen was almost breathless, but she didn't let it show. She merely thanked him with a nod and allowed Ryder to guide her back to the side of the hall where she could at least breathe without being the center of attention. It was at that moment that she saw it. A flash of movement, too quick to be casual. Someone moving away from a column, disappearing through a side door with suspicious haste. Ellen didn't recognize who it was, but she recognized the gesture. It was the kind of movement someone makes when they don't want to be noticed. "There," she said, discreetly touching Ryder's arm. "Someone just left." He followed her gaze, but the person had already vanished. His jaw tightened. "Stay here, don't leave this hall." "Are you going after them?" "I'll send someone. I can't leave you alone." But he was too tense, too torn between protecting her and pursuing the lead. Ellen saw the frustration in his eyes and realized he hated this situation. Hated having to choose. Before she could say anything, Lady Maya appeared beside them, as if summoned. She looked at Ryder with immediate understanding. "I'll stay with her," she said simply. Ryder hesitated, but Ellen saw the moment he decided to trust. He touched her face quickly, a gesture too intimate for the public setting, but one that revealed how worried he was. Then he moved away, disappearing through the same side door, and Ellen stood there beside Lady Maya, feeling the weight of being alone in the midst of a crowd that wanted her dead. "Breathe," Lady Maya said softly. "They're watching you. Don't show fear." Ellen obeyed, forcing herself to relax her shoulders to maintain a neutral expression. But it was difficult. Every person who passed seemed a potential threat. Every smile hid intentions she couldn't decipher. And Ryder's absence made everything seem more dangerous, more exposed. Lady Isabella approached again, this time accompanied by 2 other nobles Ellen vaguely recognized. They formed a semicircle around her, not exactly threatening, but definitely intimidating. "It must be difficult," Isabella commented, her tone falsely empathetic. "To be pregnant, recovering from an attack, and still have to attend an event like this." "It's my duty," Ellen replied, keeping her voice firm. "Duty," Isabella repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. Interesting how some people take duty so seriously, others not so much. There was venom in those words, a veiled accusation that Ellen had no right to be there, that her presence was an offence to traditions, to expectations, to the natural order of things. One of the other nobles, Lady Catherine, leaned slightly forward. I heard they still don't know who it was. The attacker, I mean. Must be terrifying, not knowing who wishes you dead. Ellen felt Lady Maya tense beside her but didn't respond immediately. She was processing the way Catherine had said that, the small smile at the corners of her mouth, the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. It wasn't just casual cruelty, it was something more specific. I think whoever attacked me is more afraid now than I am, Ellen responded calmly. After all, the king won't stop until he finds them. Catherine's smile wavered. Just for a second, but it was enough. She knew something. Or she was involved. Or she knew who was. Ellen was certain of it instantly. The silence that followed was broken by Ryder's return. He emerged from the same side door, and the expression on his face made Ellen's stomach churn. There was something different there. Anger, yes, but also a new clarity, as if an important piece had finally fallen into place. He approached without looking at the nobles, taking Ellen's hand firmly. We need to talk. Now. The women moved away without question, but Ellen saw the looks they exchanged. Fear. There was fear there, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that something had changed, that Ryder had discovered something important, and that the ball was about to transform into something far more dangerous than a simple social gathering. Ryder led her to a side room, away from the noise and gazes. He locked the door as soon as they entered, and only then released her hand, running his own over his temples in a gesture of suppressed frustration. I found something, he said, his voice tense. One of the servants was trying to burn documents. I managed to stop him before he finished. What kind of documents? Records of entry and exit from the castle, specific dates, including the night you were attacked. Ellen felt her heart pound. This meant proof. Concrete evidence that someone had left the castle that night, someone who shouldn't have been out, someone who had something to hide. And the servant? She asked. Did he say who ordered them burned? Ryder hesitated, and it was in that hesitation that Ellen realized the weight of what he was about to say. He said it was Lady Catherine, that she paid him to destroy anything that could link her to that night. Lady Catherine. One of the women who had just confronted her in the ballroom. One of Lady Isabella's closest nobles. Someone with enough influence to access privileged information, to plan an attack, to hire someone to do the dirty work. She was out there just now, Ellen said, her voice coming out lower than she intended, talking to me, almost boasting that no one knew who it was. Ryder clenched his fists, anger radiating from him in almost palpable waves. I'm going to confront her, now. No, Ellen said, touching his arm. If you do that here, in front of everyone, you'll cause a scandal. And if she has allies, they can destroy the evidence before you can arrest her. He stared at her, and Ellen saw the internal battle happening in his eyes. The urge to act immediately, to drag Lady Catherine out of the ballroom and force her to confess, versus the need to be strategic, not to give her room to escape through flaws in the process. Then what do you suggest? He asked, and there was an implicit trust in that question, an admission that he valued her opinion. Expose her, but do it in a way she can't deny. Use the servant as a witness. Show the documents. Make everyone see her for what she is. Ryder nodded slowly, processing. It was a risk, but it was the kind of calculated risk that could work. And more importantly, it was the kind of public humiliation that Catherine would never overcome, that would irreparably destroy her influence. Stay close to me, he said, opening the door. And don't react, no matter what happens. They returned to the ballroom together, and Ellen noticed the atmosphere had changed. People were still talking, laughing, drinking, but there was an underlying tension, an expectation that something was about to happen. Ryder walked straight to the center of the space and, His presence was enough to gradually silence the conversations. "I ask for everyone's attention," he said, his grave voice echoing through the walls. "I have an announcement to make." The silence became absolute. Ellen saw Lady Catherine in the back, her face pale, her eyes wide. She knew she had been discovered, and she was terrified. "Recently there was an attack against someone under my protection," Ryder continued, each word heavy and deliberate. "A cowardly, planned attack, executed by someone who thought they could escape impunity?" Ellen saw gazes turning to her, connecting the dots. Some looked shocked, others curious, and a few showed something close to satisfaction, as if they were eager to see where this would lead. "I have spent the last few weeks investigating, following leads, interrogating people, and I have finally discovered who it was." The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Lady Catherine tried to move toward the exit, but guards had already positioned themselves strategically, blocking any escape. She realized the trap too late. "Lady Catherine," Ryder called, and the name echoed like a death sentence. "Approach." She didn't move. She stood still, visibly trembling, her face now completely white. Lady Suha Isabella beside her took a step away, instantly disassociating herself. The other nobles did the same, creating a circle of isolation around her. "I will not repeat myself," Ryder said, his voice lower but infinitely more dangerous. Catherine finally moved, walking with trembling steps until she stood before the king. She tried to assume a dignified posture, to lift her chin, but she was crumbling inside, and everyone could see it. "You hired someone to destroy records linking you to the attack," Ryder said, not as an accusation, but as a fact. "You were seen leaving the castle on the night of the incident, and when confronted you tried to bribe a servant to eliminate the evidence." "That's a lie," Catherine said, but her voice came out weak, without conviction. "I didn't do any of that. I have no reason to—" "You have every reason," Ryder interrupted her. "You always opposed her presence here. You always made it clear you thought she didn't deserve to be by my side. And when mere words weren't enough, you decided to act." "No," Catherine insisted, tears now streaming down her face. "It wasn't like that. I didn't try to kill her, I swear. It wasn't me." There was something in the way she said that which made Ellen pay more attention. It wasn't just fear of being caught, it was something more specific. As if she were telling the truth, at least part of it. "Then why were you destroying the evidence?" Ryder pressed. Catherine opened and closed her mouth, searching for words that didn't come. And it was in that tense silence that Ellen realized. She wasn't destroying evidence against herself. She was destroying evidence of someone else. "She's protecting someone," Ellen said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Catherine's eyes widened, confirming the suspicion. Ryder turned to Ellen, then back to Catherine, and his expression grew even darker. "Who?" he demanded. Catherine shook her head, desperate. "I can't say. You don't understand. If I say, they'll kill me. They'll kill my family." There was genuine terror in her voice now. Terror that went beyond the fear of being punished by the king. It was the fear of something larger, more dangerous, more cruel. "You will tell me," Ryder affirmed, his voice low but laden with menace. "Or you will suffer consequences far worse than anything they can do." The entire ballroom watched, in absolute silence. No one moved, no one breathed loudly. It was as if everyone was watching a public trial, a moment that would define the future of many lives. Catherine looked around, searching for support, for someone to intervene, but everyone had moved away. Even Lady Isabella, who had seemed her ally, now watched her with a cold, distant expression. She was alone, completely alone. "It was Lord Arthur," she finally said, her voice breaking. "He planned everything. He paid me to destroy the evidence. He said it was for the good of the kingdom, that the Omega couldn't bear the air, that it would be the end of everything if that happened." The revelation dropped like a bomb. Ellen saw the shock ripple through the ballroom, saw nobles looking at each other with incredulity, saw Ryder himself process the information with a slowness that betrayed how much it had hit him. Lord Arthur was one of the oldest council members, one of the men the late king had trusted. He had served the kingdom for decades, occupying a position of power and respect. And now he was being accused of treason of the worst kind. "Where is he?" Ryder asked, his voice low, dangerous. Catherine pointed to a side exit, the same one Ryder had pursued someone through earlier. "He fled. As soon as he saw you returning with the evidence, he ran." The rage that exploded in Ryder was palpable. He turned to the guards, barking swift and precise orders. "Find him, close all exits, search every room, and bring him to me alive." The guards rushed out, and the ballroom dissolved into chaos. Nobles began to talk loudly, some indignant, others frightened, all trying to process what they had just witnessed. Lady Catherine collapsed to the floor, sobbing, utterly destroyed by the public exposure of her involvement. Ellen remained motionless, watching everything with a mixture of relief and fear. Relief because there was finally a name, a confirmation of who wanted her dead. But fear too, because Lord Arthur was still at large, still a threat, and there was no guarantee he wouldn't try again. Ryder returned to her side, taking her hand firmly. "You were right," he said, his voice tense, "about exposing her. It worked." "But it's not over," Ellen replied, looking at the door through which the guards had disappeared. "As long as he's free, it's not over." The search for Lord Arthur lasted all night. Ellen remained in the ballroom surrounded by guards, while Ryder personally coordinated the operation. The ball had ended abruptly, with nobles being escorted back to their rooms under strict surveillance. No one could leave the castle. No one could communicate with the outside. It was as if the entire place had been transformed into a luxurious prison. Lady Maya stayed by Ellen's side during the tense hours, offering water, trying to make her sit, concerned about her physical state. But Ellen couldn't relax. Every sound of hurried footsteps in the corridors made her jump. Every slamming door made her imagine Arthur had been found, or that he had managed to escape definitively. When dawn began to lighten the sky, Ryder returned. His face was marked by weariness and frustration. Ellen knew the answer even before he spoke. "He fled," Ryder said, his voice heavy with suppressed anger. "He had everything planned. Horses waiting, provisions, escape routes. He knew exactly what he was doing." "That means he expected to be discovered," Ellen said, processing the information. "He had a contingency plan." Ryder nodded, his fists clenched. "Which means he's not acting alone. He has support, resources, someone more powerful behind all of this." The implication was terrifying. If Arthur was just a piece in a larger game, it meant the threat hadn't passed. It meant that even with him outside the castle, Ellen still wasn't safe. "Lady Catherine remains imprisoned," Ryder continued. "I'll interrogate her again. She knows more than she said. I'm sure of it." "Let me go with you," Ellen asked. He stared at her, surprised. "It's not safe. You need to rest. I need to know the truth, and she might talk more if I'm there. If she sees what she caused." There was logic in that, even if Ryder didn't want to admit it. After a few seconds of hesitation, he agreed with a nod. "But you don't enter the cell. You stay outside, where I can see you." The castle dungeons were so different from the rest of the place that they seemed to belong to another world. The air was damp, cold, laden with the smell of mould and fear. Lady Catherine was in an individual cell, sitting on the stone floor, her arms wrapped around her knees, the thin dress she had worn to the ball now dirty and crumpled. When she saw Ryder approaching, she cowered further, but when her eyes met Ellen's, something in her expression changed. It wasn't anger. It was guilt. "I came for answers," Ryder said, stopping before the bars. "And you will give me all of them." Catherine shook her head, but not in denial. It was more a gesture of resignation, as if she knew there was no escaping now. "I didn't want to do it," she said, her voice hoarse from crying so much. "I didn't want to hurt her, but Arthur, he said it was necessary, that the kingdom wouldn't survive with an Omega as queen, that the baby would bring instability, that everything our ancestors built would crumble." They were words she had heard and repeated, but which now sounded hollow. Ryder showed no pity. You believed him. You chose to believe because it was easier than accepting change. Catherine didn't deny it. She just continued, as if she needed to confess everything before her courage completely abandoned her. "He has more allies, inside and outside the castle. People who think like him, who believe traditions are more important than lives. I don't know all the names, but I know there are many. More than you imagine." "How many?" Ryder pressed. She hesitated, counting mentally. "In the council, at least 3. Among the noble houses, maybe a dozen. And there are more common folk too, people who were convinced that an Omega on the throne would be the end of everything." Ellen felt her stomach churn. These weren't just a few isolated conspirators. It was an organized movement, with deep roots in the kingdom's power structures. And she was at the center of it all, the primary target of a resistance that refused to accept her existence. "Give me the names," Ryder demanded. Catherine listed some, and each name was like a devastating revelation. People Ryder trusted, or at least tolerated. People who had smiled at Ellen, greeted her, feigned acceptance while plotting her death. With each name, Ryder's expression grew darker, anger accumulating like a storm about to explode. When she finished, the silence that fell was too heavy to bear. Ryder turned and began to leave, but Ellen stopped before the bars, staring directly at Catherine. "Why?" she asked, and it wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine search for understanding. "Why so much hate for someone you don't even know?" Catherine looked at her with red, swollen eyes. "Because it's easier to hate than to change, easier to blame you than to admit that perhaps our traditions were wrong from the beginning." There was a brutal truth in those words, an admission that the problem wasn't Ellen, but the system that rejected her simply for existing. When they left the dungeons, Ryder was different. Colder, more calculated. He was no longer the man trying to protect someone he loved. He was the king about to declare war against part of his own kingdom. "I will summon the council today," he said, his voice firm. "I will expose every one of those involved, and I will make it clear that any future attempt against you will be considered treason, punishable by death." "It's too risky," Ellen said, though she knew trying to dissuade him was useless. "You could divide the kingdom even further." "It's already divided. Now I need to ensure the right side wins." They returned to their private chambers, where Ellen finally allowed weariness to overtake her. She collapsed onto the bed, her body aching, her mind exhausted. Ryder sat beside her, gently touching her belly, feeling the movements of the baby that was already becoming more active. "He will grow up in a better kingdom," Ryder said, more to himself than to her. "I promise that." Ellen took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Don't promise the impossible. Promise only that you will try." He looked at her, and there was something different in his eyes. A vulnerability he rarely showed, a silent admission that not even the most powerful king could control everything. The council was convened for late afternoon. Ellen would not participate, not officially, but Ryder made it clear she would be in an adjacent room listening to everything. He wanted her to know exactly what she was facing, who her enemies were, how far the conspiracies went. When the council members arrived, the tension was palpable. Some seemed nervous, others defiant, and a few remained neutral, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Ryder wasted no time with formalities. "You know the accusations," he began, his voice echoing through the room. "Treason, conspiracy, attempted murder. And I have evidence linking some of you to these crimes. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one challenged. It was as if everyone was waiting for the moment they would be exposed. "Lord Victor?" Ryder called, and an older man with a greying beard swallowed hard. "You met with Arthur 3 times the week before the attack. Care to explain why?" Victor tried to maintain composure, but he was clearly shaken. "They were routine meetings, kingdom affairs." "Lies," Ryder cut him off. "I have witnesses who heard you discussing how to deal with the Omega, and the conclusion was that she needed to be eliminated." Victor opened his mouth to protest, but found no words. He was trapped, and he knew it. Ryder didn't wait for him to defend himself. He moved to the next name, and then the next, exposing each conspirator with surgical precision. Ellen listened to everything from the next room, feeling a mixture of validation and sadness. Validation because her suspicions were being confirmed, sadness because she realized how much Ryder was being forced to destroy relationships, to dismantle structures of trust that had taken years to build. When the session ended, 3 council members had been arrested, 2 had fled, and those who remained were too terrified to oppose anything the king decided. Ryder emerged from the room, his face etched with weariness, but there was a new determination in his eyes. "It's over," he said when he found Ellen. "At least the part inside the castle." "But Arthur is still out there," she reminded him. He nodded, somber. "And as long as he is, you won't be completely safe. But now that I know who his allies are in here, I can protect you better." Ellen wanted to believe that. She wanted to feel that the worst had passed. But something inside her, an intuition that had been sharpening since the attack, told her the threat wasn't over. That Arthur wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily, and that somehow he would return to finish what he started. The following weeks brought a strange change to the castle. It was as if everyone were walking on thin ice, waiting for something to break at any moment. The arrested council members were judged swiftly and mercilessly. 2 were banished from the kingdom, 1 was executed for direct treason. The message was clear. Challenging the king would cost everything. Ellen felt the weight of those decisions, not because she pitied the conspirators, but because she knew that each punishment fueled resentments, created new enemies, and further radicalized those who already opposed her. The peace Ryder tried to impose was a peace built on fear, not on genuine acceptance. She had resumed circulating more freely through the castle, always accompanied by guards, but at least she could breathe air different from the chamber where she had been confined. The maids treated her with more respect now, or more fear. It was hard to distinguish. And the nobles who had once openly confronted her now averted their gaze, bowed in silent deference, kept a safe distance. It was during one of these walks that Ellen found a letter. It was folded and hidden under a flower vase in the corridor leading to the inner gardens. She knew she shouldn't touch it, that she should call the guards immediately, but curiosity was stronger. She opened the paper with trembling hands and read the words written in elegant calligraphy. "You think you've won, but this is far from over. Arthur will return, and when he does, not even the king will be able to save you." There was no signature, no name, but the threat was real enough to make Ellen's heart race. She looked around, searching for any sign of who might have left it there, but the corridor was empty. She quickly put the letter away and continued walking, trying to appear normal, but inside she was crumbling. When she told Ryder, he exploded in fury. He ordered every room searched, every person with access to that corridor interrogated, increased security around Ellen to an almost suffocating degree. But they found nothing. Whoever had left the letter knew exactly how to move unseen. "He still has people in here," Ryder said, frustration evident in his voice. "Even after everything, he still has loyalists." "Or people afraid of him," Ellen suggested. "Fear can be stronger than loyalty." Ryder looked at her, and she saw understanding dawn in his eyes. He was trying to govern through force, but Arthur governed through fear. And fear was a tool that didn't depend on physical presence. Ellen's pregnancy was advancing. Her belly grew larger each day, and with it grew the urgency to resolve the situation before the baby was born. Ryder was obsessed with the idea that Ellen needed to give birth safely, surrounded by trusted people, without Arthur's shadow hanging over them. It was then that the news arrived. One of the trackers sent to find Arthur returned with information. He had been seen in a border town, gathering men, buying weapons, preparing for something. He wasn't fleeing. He was organizing for a counterattack. Ryder immediately summoned his generals. The war room filled with maps, strategies, discussions about how many men to send, the best route, how to encircle Arthur before he could act. Ellen didn't participate in these meetings, but she overheard fragments through the doors, through the guards talking quietly in the corridors. One night, when Ryder returned exhausted from these discussions, she confronted him. "You're going after him personally, aren't you?" It wasn't a question. She knew the answer even before seeing the expression on his face. "I have to," he said simply. "It's the only way to ensure it's done right." "What if it's a trap? What if he's expecting exactly that?" Ryder approached, taking her hands in his. "Then I'll be prepared. But I can't live like this, Ellen. I can't let you live like this, looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next attack. It has to end now." There was an unwavering determination in his voice. Ellen wanted to argue, wanted to make him promise he wouldn't take unnecessary risks, but she knew it would be futile. Ryder had already made his decision, and when he made a decision, he rarely changed his mind. He left 2 days later, taking with him a small but lethal troop of his best warriors. He left the castle under the command of one of the few council members he still trusted, and left Ellen under such rigorous surveillance that she could barely breathe without someone watching. The days that followed were the worst of Ellen's life. There was no news, no updates, just silence and waiting. She tried to keep busy, walking in the gardens, reading, talking with the healer about the preparations for the birth. But her mind always returned to Ryder, to where he might be, if he was all right, if he would capture Arthur or fall into an ambush. It was on the 5th night that she had the premonition. Something was wrong, very wrong. She woke up with her heart pounding, cold sweat, feeling an inexplicable urgency to get out of bed, to do something. The guards tried to calm her, but she couldn't lie down again. And then she heard it. A distant but unmistakable sound. Hoofbeats, many horses, arriving too fast with too much urgency. She ran to the window, ignoring the guards' protests, and saw torches approaching in the darkness. They were not Ryder's banners. They were symbols she didn't recognize, but which her instinct immediately identified as threats. Arthur had returned, and he had brought an army. The castle went on immediate alert. Doors were locked, guards positioned, weapons distributed. But Ellen knew with a painful certainty that it wouldn't be enough. If Arthur had the courage to attack the castle directly, it meant he had more resources than anyone had imagined. It meant he had powerful allies. It meant he no longer cared to hide his intentions. Lady Maya appeared, running into the room, her face pale. "You need to get out of here, now." "Where? The castle is surrounded." "There are secret passages, old ones. Most don't know they exist, but I do. I can take you out, to a safe place until the king returns." Ellen hesitated. The idea of fleeing, of hiding while the castle was attacked, seemed cowardly. But then she felt the baby move inside her, reminding her that she wasn't fighting only for herself. She had a life to protect, a life that depended entirely on her. "Let's go," she said, grabbing only a thick cloak. They ran through the corridors, avoiding the main areas where the confrontation had already begun. Ellen heard screams, metal clashing against metal, the terrifying sound of violence spreading through the castle that was supposed to be her sanctuary. Lady Maya guided her with precision, knowing every shortcut, every hidden staircase, every disguised door. They finally reached a narrow passage behind the main kitchen. Maya pushed a stone wall that slowly rotated, revealing a dark, damp tunnel that smelled of mold and earth. This leads outside the walls. You'll emerge near the woods. From there, you can hide until it's safe. And you? Ellen asked. I'll go back. I have to help with the wounded, but you can't stay. It's you he wants. Ellen didn't have time to thank her. Lady Maya gently pushed her into the tunnel and closed the passage behind her, leaving her alone in the darkness. Ellen swallowed the panic and began to walk, her hands touching the damp walls to guide herself, her feet stumbling on irregularities in the floor. She didn't know how long it took to cross the tunnel. It felt like an eternity. When she finally saw a faint light ahead and emerged outside, the night was cold and silent. The castle in the distance looked like a bonfire, with torches and fire and chaos visible even from that distance. Ellen ran to the woods, her heavy body protesting, but adrenaline keeping her moving. She found a natural shelter among old trees, a small but protected space, and collapsed there, trying to catch her breath, trying not to go into full panic. It was then that she heard footsteps. They weren't animal, they were human, and they were coming her way. She tried to hide better, but her swollen belly made any discreet movement impossible. The footsteps grew closer, and Ellen held her breath, praying that whoever it was would pass without noticing her presence. But they didn't. A figure emerged from among the trees, and Ellen recognized him immediately. It was Lord Arthur. And he was smiling. Finally, Lord Arthur said, his voice laden with cruel satisfaction, I was beginning to think you'd never leave that castle. Ellen didn't respond. She was calculating distances, looking for escape routes, but knew it was futile. She was exhausted, pregnant, and he was fresh, armed, and clearly prepared for this moment. You don't have to do this, she said, keeping her voice firm despite her fear. The king will return. He will find you. Arthur laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the forest. The king is busy chasing shadows. I left false trails on purpose. He won't return in time, and when he does, he'll find only ashes and memories. He took a step forward, and Ellen instinctively recoiled, her back hitting a tree trunk. She was cornered. But then she noticed something. Arthur was alone. There were no guards, no allies. He had come personally, without support, overconfident in his own abilities. Why do you hate so much? She asked, not because she expected to change his mind, but because she needed to buy time. I never did anything against you. You exist, Arthur replied, his contempt evident. Your existence is an affront to everything this kingdom represents. Traditions that took centuries to establish, hierarchies that maintain order, bloodlines that guarantee strength. And then there's you, an Omega, without family, without noble blood, with nothing but the weakness you carry in your essence. Those words might have destroyed Ellen weeks ago, but now, after all she had been through, they only made her feel pity for him. Pity for someone so trapped in a dead past that he couldn't see the present, much less imagine a different future. You're wrong, she said, and there was new strength in her voice. The kingdom doesn't need traditions that kill. It needs change, people willing to build something better. Arthur clenched his fists, rage distorting his features. You don't understand anything. You have no idea what's at stake. He drew his sword, and the moonlight made the blade gleam menacingly. Ellen knew she had reached her limit. There was no more delaying, no more escaping. If she was going to die, at least she would die standing facing her killer. But then she heard another sound, more horses, and this time she recognized the banners even before seeing them. It was Ryder. He had returned, and he wasn't alone. Arthur heard it too, and for the first time his confidence wavered. He looked at Ellen, then in the direction of the sounds, calculating if he had time to kill her before being caught, and in that moment of hesitation, Ellen did the only thing she could do. She screamed. The scream tore through the night, loud and desperate, and it was enough. Ryder emerged from among the trees like a storm, sword already in hand, his eyes fixed on Arthur with a fury that transcended words. "Get away from her," Ryder said, each word laden with mortal threat. Arthur had no choice. He retreated, knowing he was at a disadvantage now, that the king surpassed him in strength, in skill, in everything. But he didn't lower his sword. He didn't surrender. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," Arthur said, his voice trembling with rage. "You should have executed me along with the others." "I should have," Ryder agreed. "But now I'll correct that mistake." The confrontation was brutal and swift. Arthur fought with desperation, but Ryder fought with something more powerful. The absolute need to protect what he loved. Swords met with a clang of metal, sparks flying, but the outcome was inevitable. Ryder was superior in every way. And when he finally disarmed Arthur, forcing him to his knees, the relief Ellen felt was so intense that her legs almost gave out. Ryder pointed his sword at Arthur's throat, and for a moment Ellen thought he would execute him right there. But he hesitated. He looked at her, searching for guidance, for permission, for something to justify what he was about to do. "No," Ellen said, her voice coming out firmer than she expected. "Not like this. Take him back. Judge him publicly. Show the kingdom that justice is served with law, not with vengeance." Ryder stared at her for long seconds. Then he lowered his sword, signaling to the guards to arrest Arthur. The man was dragged away, still shouting empty threats, still claiming he was right, that history would prove him correct. But no one listened anymore. When they were alone, Ryder approached Ellen carefully, as if she was something too precious to be touched abruptly. He checked if she was injured, if the baby was all right, if she needed anything. And only when he was sure she was safe did he allow emotion to overcome him. He pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her hair, and Ellen felt his body tremble with the relief of having found her alive. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured, his voice broken. "When I saw the castle being attacked and you weren't there, I thought it was too late." "I'm here," she said, holding him back. "We're here." They returned to the castle together, and what they found was devastation. Parts of the walls damaged, bodies of guards and invaders scattered, the smell of smoke and blood permeating everything. But there were also survivors, people working together to put out fires, to help the injured, to begin rebuilding. And when they saw the king return with Ellen by his side, a murmur of hope swept through the crowd. The following days were days of reconstruction, not just physical, but emotional and political. Arthur was publicly judged, as Ellen had requested. The evidence against him was irrefutable, and even those who secretly agreed with his views could not openly defend him. He was condemned to permanent exile, sent to distant lands from which he could never return. It was a punishment considered by many to be excessively lenient, but Ellen had insisted that the kingdom needed to learn to resolve conflicts without bloodshed whenever possible. The court was slow to accept completely, but it began to change. Some nobles still looked at her with contempt, but others began to treat her with genuine respect. Not because they feared the king, but because they had witnessed her strength, her dignity, her capacity to forgive without being weak. When the baby finally arrived 3 months later, the entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath. It was a boy. Strong, healthy, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's resilience. Ryder held him with a tenderness Ellen had never seen in him, and when he looked at her, there were tears in his eyes. "He will grow up in a better world," Ryder said, repeating the promise he had made before. "I will ensure that." "We will ensure that," Ellen corrected, touching his face. "Together." And so it was, amidst ruins and reconstruction, that the kingdom began to understand that change was not synonymous with destruction, that traditions could be questioned without everything crumbling, that an Omega on the throne was not the end of an era, but the beginning of something new, something that had the potential to be better than anything that had existed before. Ellen never forgot the night in the snow, the attack that almost killed her, the fear she carried for so long. But she also didn't let it define her. She was more than a victim. She was a survivor. She was a mother. And, gradually, with effort and time, she was becoming a queen. The castle, with its rebuilt walls and painful memories, truly became her home. Not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. Because she had fought for it, bled for it, and finally earned the right to exist in it without apology. And when, years later, her son asked about the scars she still carried, Ellen didn't lie. She told the truth. She told about the fear, about the pain, about how many times she thought of giving up. But she also told about the strength she found when she didn't know she had it, about the people who supported her when she needed it most, about how it's possible to survive the worst and still build something beautiful on the other side. The kingdom would never be perfect. There was still prejudice, still resistance, still those who wanted to return to the old ways. But now there was also hope. There was change. There was living proof that different could coexist, that hierarchies could be challenged, that the future didn't have to be a repetition of the past. And when Ellen looked out the window of the room that had once imprisoned her and now embraced her, watching the sun rise over the mountains that had almost been her tomb, she allowed gratitude to fill her. Gratitude for being alive. Gratitude for having fought. Gratitude for having found, amidst the chaos and fear, something that very much resembled love. The kind of love that didn't demand perfection but offered acceptance. The kind of love that didn't promise ease but guaranteed presence. The kind of love that, in the end, was worth every scar, every tear, every moment of terror she had had to traverse to get there.